So we should imagine that you already know a little bit about the Union Chain Bridge already, our project, which is subtitled Crossing Borders, Connecting Communities, because you're already here. But in short, though, a 200-year-old suspension bridge crossing the River Tweed, linking Scotland and England, is currently being conserved. This bridge is pioneering in several ways, and the much more celebrated works of Brunel, Telford, the Roeblings, Calatrava, and others relied largely on the innovation of the Union Chain Bridge and its not-so-well-known creator, Captain Sam Brown. Our talk series is inspired by the bridge and its surroundings, and will be broad-ranging across a spectrum of interests. We'll tell you a bit more about that towards the end of this evening's talk. But we could not have found a better person to be our first guest speaker. Stephen K. Jones is a stalwart of both the Institution of Civil Engineers, ICE Wales Cymru, which I hope I said correctly, and a trustee of the Friends of the Union Chain Bridge. He's, amongst many other things, editor of Welsh Achievements in Science, Technology and Engineering, a visiting research fellow at Bath University, a Newcomen's Society member, Wales member of the ICE Panel for Historical Engineering Works, and Chief Executive of the South Wales Institute of Engineers Educational Trust. That was hard to get out, and is an expert in industrial development and economic regeneration, latterly at the Welsh Development Agency. Engineering history, particularly the work of Brunel, has long been an interest of his, and his final volume of the Brunel in South Wales trilogy was published in 2009. Exhibitions include Web of Iron, and recent publications include chapters in Samuel Brown and the Union Chain Bridge, and Spanning the Centuries, both of which you can buy from the Friends, and The Engineering Revolution, How the Modern World Has Been Transformed by Technology. Quite how he has time to be with us tonight when he has a finger in so many important pies is quite beyond us, but we're very, very glad he's here to give us a fascinating talk. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome a Union Chain Bridge, a Welsh link, a talk by Stephen Jones.
Right, well, I wanted to talk to you about the Welsh links, notably the Welsh iron that's involved with the famous Union Chain Bridge. So I'm going to hopefully talk to you about the origin of that ironwork, where it came from, what the history was, and that history is about a company called Brown Lennox, which Captain Samuel Brown founded and established two purpose-built chain works, one at Millwall on the Isle of Dogs, which was established in 1812, and at Newbridge, which is now Pontypridd, in 1818. So I'll go straight into my first slide, if I may. Okay, and my next slide. There we are. Union Chain Bridge, the Welsh link. It was something that we wanted to celebrate here in Wales, and we persuaded the ICE Wales Cymru, which is the Welsh part of the Institute of Civil Engineers, to get involved back in 2019 to celebrate the start of making the iron for the Union Chain Bridge. Now, while Pontypridd, I thought I'd just mention the origins, although it wasn't actually Pontypridd when Captain Brown came and established the chain works. It was simply known as Newbridge, and it was known as Newbridge because of William Edwards's famous bridge, the Pont y Dupreed, which gave its name to the town. And I suppose if you're thinking of famous links with Pontypridd, it's William Edwards's bridge. If you're still looking at bridges, it's one of the very early reinforced concrete bridges, the Barrow Bridge of 1907 by Mouchal, or possibly Brunel's Taffel Railway viaduct across the Rhondda River, which is still standing, still taking trains from Merthyr down to Cardiff and into the Rhondda Valley. But what about the chain works? Well, probably that doesn't rank as high, if at all, in people's recollections of Pontypridd or what they think Pontypridd is famous for. But really, it was the first industry in Pontypridd, and it was established because of the canal. And you can see the canal there running diagonally from bottom left towards middle right. And the chainworks just grew and grew from 1818, although Brown had been acquiring the land and the existing works there from about 1816. If you ask the man in the street what is Pontypridd famous for, and it's not unusual, they'll probably say Tom Jones. But apart from Tom Jones, what else is Pontypridd famous for? Well, back to the William Edwards's Bridge and coal mining, of which Pontypridd had several pits very close to the centre of the town, and of course in the nearby Rhondda Valley, sending coal down, making Pontypridd a big interchange for the shipment of coal sent from the various pits down to the docks at Cardiff. Now, I mentioned that we got involved with the part of the run-up, if you like, to the bicentenary. Of course, we had no thoughts that anything like COVID would be around to spoil the real celebrations. But back on the 26th of July, 2019, we put a plaque up at Pontypridd, and you can see the plaque there in the corner. And we put it up on the site, and I'm sad to say this, on the site of Brown Lennox, because Brown Lennox at Pontypridd has now gone completely. There's nothing left to connect the works at all, apart from the remains of the canal. And I'll be showing you some images of that later. But Matt Jones, who was then our chairman for ICE Wales Cymru, unveiled the plaque along with the Breed, and he's actually that beyond that railing is the drop down to the canal. So it was probably an appropriate place for the plaque to be sited. Notice we've got a link there. We've got an I-bar coupling link. It was one of two I managed to acquire during the 1970s restoration of Union Chain Bridge. One I arranged for Brown Lennox themselves to have it, and they proudly had it in their boardroom until the closure. Now it's in Pontypridd Museum, and the other set I still have and are able to bring it out on occasions like this. What about chains? Now, Brown was really involved with maritime chain cables. The suspension bridge was a sort of a diversion for him that he saw as being fairly lucrative, or a lucrative deviation from the chain making. He was in competition at the time with three individuals. There was Robert Flynn from Tyneside. There was Thomas Brunton, and of course his own enterprise, which he established in a purpose-built works. But before that, he had a number of small sites in the London area, in Radcliffe Road and places like that. And it was probably through those small Smith works that he was developing his chain, that he came and met Philip Thomas, and I'll say a bit more about Philip Thomas as well. But his original chains were, as you can see on the left there, of a twisted variety, and originally without a stud. There's an example there with the middle link having a pointed stud. So Brown and Brunton were both centred on London, and Flynn was on the Tyne. Brown really managed to survive both of these. Thomas Brunton probably survived a bit longer than Robert Flynn, but by the middle of the 19th century, he was the premier chain maker, certainly for the Royal Navy. In fact, he had an exclusive contract to supply chain cable, and all the prestigious shipping lines, particularly Cunard, had their chains made by Brown Lennox. Now, this is an interesting painting. It's probably the earliest painting we're aware of that shows chain cable in use. And this is the bombardment of Algiers in 1816, although the painting was completed some years after. So it's not by any means a contemporary, but it's based on recollections of those that were there. But it clearly shows a hempen hawser there on one hawse hole and a chain on the other. You can see there's the chain, and that's one of the earliest instances we know of illustrating the use of chain cable in the Royal Navy. And from about 1811, they were issuing one chain cable to each of the major ships in the Royal Navy, still carrying rope, and it wasn't until about the late 1820s that they finally dispensed with hemp altogether. So there we are. There's quite an early image there showing how chain cable was used in the Royal Navy. Now, Newbridge quickly became the major supplier for Brown for chain cable, and also for his chain suspension bridge links. So it's connected in a way with a number of pioneers, with Captain Brown and Thomas Telford, because Brown had collaborated with Thomas Telford in the development of a possible suspension bridge across the Mersey at Runcorn from about 1816. But that project was never taken up, and the two went their separate ways. So, but anyway, as a pioneer in the development of the suspension bridge, George William Lennox was the nephew of Samuel Lennox, and he took over the works from about 1840. And he's quite really unlike his uncle, who had no hands-on involvement with the works. He was just a financial investor into the enterprise. George William Lennox certainly carried out a number of improvements to the manufacture of chain cable and to the development of ancillary buoys, anchors, and so on, involved in the production there at Dupreed. We've also got Brunel involved. Brunel gets involved really in two major instances. One early on in the development of the Clifton suspension bridge, where Brunel had won the Clifton, the competition that was held in 1829 to design a bridge across the Clifton Gorge at Bristol. And Brunel came to South Wales because he wanted, he particularly wanted Brown Lennox to supply the chain cable for his bridge. But Captain Brown, I think, was a bit put out that this young 24-year-old engineer had won the competition when he was the most experienced builder of suspension bridges in the country. So Brown Lennox refused to have anything to do with the links, and eventually persuaded John Guest of the Dowless Works to supply the flat eye bars that were eventually destined for Clifton. And although they didn't end up on Clifton, another set did, but that's that's another story. And of course, you have the great skill base of the people that worked at Brown Lennox, generations of skilled craftsmen, smiths, strikers, and everyone involved in the manufacture of chain cable. And as ships' tonnages got bigger, ships got bigger, they had to have increasingly larger chain cable to make sure that the shipping was adequately secure in terms of anchorage and in mooring. So it's quite a great skill base that lasted really until the end of chain making at Brown Lennox. And Philip Thomas, he was the first. He was really a great source of information and expertise to Captain Brown in the early days, and eventually he was rewarded by Captain Brown. He was a joint patentee with him on some of his chain patents, and also would run the chain works at Dupreed from the opening until his death in 1840. Now, up to about when did it close? 1980, I think it was. Millwall was still a going concern for Brown Lennox, as you can see on the Thames there. Brown Lennox and Company's Wharf next to the pier, and that site, as I say, closed. And right at the end, they were still making maritime equipment like these mooring buoys, but as I say, chain cable production had long since switched to Dupreed, and all the prestigious chain cable orders were carried out on Dupreed. Back in 2013, I happened to be in Greenwich and took this photograph of HMS Illustrious, and she's moored there in the centre of the Thames. There's Millwall Pier behind, you can see there. And I was just wondering, because that was roughly where Brunel's Great Eastern steamship would have been moored after it was eventually launched from the launch site at Millwall. And I was just trying to work out in my mind the dimensions. And when I went back and Googled the dimensions for HMS Illustrious, I realized Brunel's Great Eastern was actually longer than the Great Eastern, 693 feet long, but not as wide as HMS Illustrious, just to give you an idea of one of their major chain cable orders. Well, this is what the Newbridge chain works at Dupreed looked like. Here we have the canal with the various locks there. This is Ynys Llanhariad locks, and these are the chain works that were established. And in the background, we've got the River Taff there. We've got the Rhondda River flowing into the Taff at this point. And in the background is Brunel's Taffrail Railway and his Taffrail Viaduct there. The William Edwards's Bridge is just out of picture here. And if we switch to the bottom picture here, which gives you a view sort of looking from the left-hand side, we can see William Edwards's Bridge, and again the main station on Dupreed on the Taffrail Railway. Sorry, did I mute myself then? Sorry. Dupreed didn't have its own church until 1840, and the nearest church was Eglwysyllan, which was some miles away. But if you go to the churchyard today, it's very much a rural church in the middle of farmlands. And there is one grave you can identify to Brown Lennox, and that was as it says there, their fellow shopmate, David Miles, who accidentally drowned in the Taff, aged 26 years. Coming forward now to the 1970s, this is an aerial view of Pontypridd Works, and at the top half of or top third of the picture is the old road. This is the new, so this one here is the new A470 dual carriageway that sort of cut part of the works in half and separated it from the town. But the old road, you can see, is on the other side of the works, and this was where their main entrance was. And just about here is the Bunch of Grapes public house, which is still a pub, still there today. Obviously being closed like every other establishment, but there's the pub, and that was the main entrance into the chain works, because the oldest part of the chain works is this section here, and then throughout the years they expanded by developing their own foundry, making their own steel, and they went into different products as well as their staple of chain cable. And an earlier photograph now taken from the old road and the entrance down into the chain works. There's the Bunch of Grapes just behind that house, and on the other side of the road there is the chain works mission, which was a church hall designed to provide spiritual lessons for workers in the chain works. The canal you can see there as well. Now, coming back to the late 1970s in terms of this colour image, you can see, sadly, the canal is very much overgrown. It was abandoned completely in the 1930s and just kept on as a water supply for Brown Lennox. And in fact, this is one of the surviving sections of the canal because of that. The Bunch of Grapes is still there. Oops, I've lost my... Bunch of Grapes is still there. And you came in, crossed the canal and into the works itself. Now, the first building you can see as you cross the works was the chain testing house. And this is interesting because the works also had access for canal boats to come into the works and go under this building. And the idea was that once chains were tested, they were lowered through the floor into the boats below, and the boats would then take the canal boats would then take the chain down the canal, down to Cardiff docks for export wherever, other parts of the country or other parts of the world. So it's very interesting survivor. Sadly, none of this is left now apart from the remains of the canal. And another view of the canal in working order, as you can see in the top left. And you can see one at the exit there for that canal, the canal works branch there coming out onto the canal. Brown Lennox were actually the last users of the canal in the 1930s. When they stopped using the canal was when the canal was closed. The canal had been closed in sections coming down from Merthyr from the 1890s, but it stayed open to service Brown Lennox right up until the 1930s. Even though the Taffrail Railway serviced the town of Pontypridd, there was no direct connection until the 1860s. But as I say, Brunel continued to rely on the canal for transporting their product down to the docks. And here's Philip Thomas. Philip Thomas died in 1840. He's an interesting character. He actually has two gravestones. This one I've just put up on the screen is actually not his was his original gravestone, but it's not where he's buried. That's situated on the common just behind me, as just behind this viewpoint. Sorry, I need to go on. The reason why that gravestone is not over his grave was that his relatives took offence with the wording that was put on it. And I'll read out what it says. It starts off with, "Stranger, halt. I am placed here to commemorate the virtue and abilities of," and his name was originally there, Philip Thomas, but on the gravestone you can see it's been chiseled out. So to commemorate the virtue and abilities of Philip Thomas, who, after managing the chain work on my right for the space of 21 years, much to the benefit of all mankind, died and was buried. So you can see it was rather crude wording that sounds as if Philip Thomas died much to the benefit of all mankind. So the relatives had the gravestone removed, and he is under a new gravestone in the new church that was built to cater for Dupreed, which was opened in the same year that he died, in 1840. Well, chain cable manufacture was developed by Samuel Brown and Philip Thomas, and it's fair to say that Brown copied a few ideas from others, such as Brunton's oval link, because Brown's first idea was that it should be a twisted link, and you can see there's one of the examples from Pontypridd Museum there in the picture. But the idea was you get some round bar, you would, as you can see in A above there, turn it to form a U shape, and then have it turned then so that you could form a scarf joint there, originally on the end, but later on the long lengths of the link, and that would be the chain. Now, these were done by the smiths on their anvils for the very early and smaller sizes, but by the well, really by the 1850s onwards, I suppose, they were having to use link formers to turn the bar iron into links hydraulically and then by steam power. You can see there's a link former there in place, and you'd have these various different formers, sizes of formers to go on the machine in order to turn the links. And there's you see a red hot section there being turned on the link former. Then the smiths would then thread the uncompleted, unclosed link into another link, and then shut the link, as it was termed. As the links got bigger, it required more muscle power. You can see there's a two-handled sledgehammer there to give the maximum power towards hitting the link. and they even had a 3-handle sledgehammer for the very larger sizes as well. Very much a manual strength job that involved a great deal of skill, but also strength. And there's the fathoms of cable, the lengths of cable, having been tested. They're lined up, sorry, they're ready to be tested, lined up, ready to go into the next building, which was the testing shop, which was a hydraulic testing machine, in which they would test so many links in each fathom to ensure that it met the standard proof for that particular cable. Here's an example of a 3.5-inch cable that they were, Cunard had requested for one of their liners. You can see the 3 links there hanging on the right before testing, and the links hanging on the left that have been tested. As you can see, they have stretched a bit, but they haven't broken. So they were well within the proof test for the links, and they passed. And that's the part of the rigorous testing that Brown ensured. In fact, he was a pioneer in the testing of chain, which meant that you could rely on Brown Lennox cable for use, for shipping, for your particular needs, and rely on it really that it was as good as what it said it was. Interestingly, George William Lennox commented on the 1864 Chain Testing Act, which was brought in by Parliament. Although Brown Lennox had been testing all their chains from the beginning, some of the other chain cable manufacturers didn't, or used various different sorts of means of testing. And the government established the Lloyd's testing houses in order to ensure that there was a uniform standard and quality in chain testing. But apparently a number of the chains that had been tested by this method, not by Brown Lennox, actually came apart and failed the test, even though they'd previously been selling the chain as meeting certain test proof. The works also manufactured specialized ancillary gear such as swivels, and these particular swivels are used in the laying of telegraph cables across the oceans of the world. And in fact, Brown Lennox developed a particular swivel according to the design of Captain Bedwell, which were ordered by the Great Eastern when it laid the Atlantic telegraph cable. And this sort of specialized equipment kept the Smiths going in for a number of years after they stopped making chain cable. I was fortunate to meet the last manager of the Chain Smiths, Ken Holloway, and he had started. He'd actually his family had come down 3 generations earlier from the Black Country, where there's also a tradition of chain cable making, and he rose through being a smith to becoming the manager of the Smiths section, and then retired when they finally phased out all this ancillary work. Well, I've mentioned the Great Eastern a couple of times. So there she is at Milford Haven. She's at Nayland on the Milford Haven. She was the longest ship in the world, 693 feet long when she was launched. She was still the largest ship in the world when she was scrapped 50 years later. And she wasn't exceeded in all dimensions until the launch of the Mauritania in 1907. So a record unbroken for some 50 years. She was ill-fated in many respects, and it wasn't until she was put to use laying the Atlantic Telegraph cable that she was really successful, because being the largest ship in the world, she could carry all the cable that was required to go from Valencia in Ireland across to Newfoundland, some 2,000 odd miles. And it was Brunel, famous engineer, who designed the Great Eastern with John Scott Russell, and he specified Brunel for the chain cable. It was the largest ship in the world. The chain cable was going to be the largest chain cables then made up to date, 2 7/8 inch diameter. And the directors of the company building the Great Eastern tried to get Brunel to choose a cheaper option. But Brunel was adamant. He said, Brown Lennox, he said, I have to have the chain cables from Brown Lennox. He said, they're not the cheapest, but they're the best. And that was to work out quite prophetic for the Great Eastern, because she managed to survive the Royal Charter storm of 1859, relying on a chain cable when hundreds of ships around the coast at that time dragged their cables and came to grief. Just a view of the, she's on what is called a gridiron, because there was no dry dock large enough to take her. So at low tide, she was beached. Sorry, at high tide, she was beached. She was put onto the this gridiron, which is a timber construction, and then allowed to settle onto the framework at low tide. And it was then that her hull could be inspected if needed. There's the chain on board the Great Eastern. So if we come back to the Union Chain Bridge, and these are photographs I took just a few years ago before it was decided, or before all the work was started to refurbish the bridge. And there are many exciting pictures now showing that work in progress. But I just wanted to point out that Captain Brown's bridge was a pioneer. It was the first major chain suspension bridge, first road suspension bridge with a level deck. It wasn't the first in the world, because James Finlay had developed that type of bridge, but he took it to another level, and he collaborated with Thomas Telford on a joint design for Runcorn. But I mentioned earlier, the Runcorn project didn't take off, and they both went their separate ways. Brown opened Union Bridge first, completed Union Bridge first. Thomas Telford's Menai Bridge, which is still standing today, but it doesn't have its original chains because they were replaced in the 1940s with steel chains. That was opened in 1826, so 6 years after Union Bridge. It is interesting that Telford didn't use Brown Lennox for the supply of his chain cable, although the design that he used was actually covered by one of Captain Brown's patents. So the two men must have had some sort of an agreement to allow that, as far as I'm aware. And there's no record of Brown making any comment in that respect, which is interesting. Who else influenced? Well, James Rennie advised Brown on the towers at Union Bridge. Robert Stevenson was another engineer that came and visited the site, and they all put forward designs for suspension bridges. But really, it was Telford that I suppose brought the road suspension bridge into the mainstream with Menai and the smaller example at Conway. And then you had William Tierney Clark developing Hammersmith Bridge, which was also supplied by Captain Brown, and other engineers building their examples. But Brown, by far and large, was responsible for more chain suspension bridges than any other engineer in Britain. And I just wanted to throw this in because it's an interesting link. Hugh ONeill was an architectural draftsman, possibly an architect as well, and he contributed a number of sketches, very detailed sketches of Bristol. And you can see this is Bristol from the Clifton part of Bristol, looking down to the centre with the glass works just on the left there. And if I just mention George Buchanan, we know he visited, he was an engineer who visited the Union Bridge and made this sketch of the bridge. You see there, drawn by George Buchanan. And I want to keep this on the screen to show you the next part. He would go on to promote his own idea for making a suspension bridge at Montrose, but he was unsuccessful there because Samuel Brown's project for a bridge at Montrose was successful. But just going back now, we're back to Hugh ONeill, and this is Hugh ONeill's design for a bridge at Clifton across the Avon. Notice the similarity between that and George Buchanan's design sketch of Union Bridge. It's virtually identical, apart from obviously to details to fit the topography. So is it Hugh ONeill after George Buchanan, or did Hugh ONeill actually come up to the Tweed to sketch and to take notes on Captain Brown's bridge? It's something I'm currently looking into. If anyone has come across this chap, Hugh ONeill, the design, by the way, dates from was submitted in 1822. He had the backing of a prominent Bristol businessman, Thomas Daniel, who wanted to develop some of the lands that he had on the other side, in the Lee Woods side, opposite Clifton, and saw a bridge as being in his interests. So it was never taken up, and 7 years later they had the competition in which Brunel was ultimately successful. Another bridge with Welsh links is the Wellington Bridge at Aberdeen. And now this is interesting because it's a flat eye bar link, not a round eye bar link. Now Brown was using round bar iron from the Cyfarthfa works at Merthyr for his early bridges. And as far as I'm aware, he didn't make any flat eye bar links at Newbridge. But the flat eye bar links here came from the Penydarren works at Merthyr. So there's another Welsh connection there. And back to Calemouth Bridge, which is one of my favourites. It's such a simplistic and effective design. Round eye bar. This would have been supplied by by Newbridge. And also there were 2 suspension bridges in Wales. One you can see in that insert there. That's the Keameys suspension bridge across the Usk, which is now gone. But incidentally, the new bridge on the site, although it's not a suspension bridge, is still known as Chain Bridge. And there was another one at Llandovery, and that's also gone. But it's interesting, all the paperwork to do with these smaller bridges was detailed by Philip Thomas. And Philip Thomas, of course, was responsible for sending the finished chain links from Newbridge up to Berwick by coastal vessel, and then to the site to be constructed into the Union Chain Bridge. Now, there's a number of photographs, and the best thing I can do of current activity is to refer you to the Friends of the Union Chain Bridge. Their supplement number 5 came out just a few weeks ago, and you can see the program there, and I think it goes up to 12th of February there, detailing some of the work that's been carried out on the removal of the chainwork. And I understand that the chains will be removed during March, and Ted Cawthon tells me that 1st of March, I think, is the scheduled date for taking down the chains to refurbish, which is an appropriate date. 1st of March, St. David's Day. That's good. And Spanning the Centuries, Carol mentioned the book, which is available. And there's the details if you want to order a copy, unionbridgefriends.com. There we are, if you're interested. And chain cable, it's a link between, it's a link from the early sailing vessels, wooden sailing vessels, the early 1800s, right through, in terms of design, right through to the present day. Thank you.